Okay, so I got my plugs put in. I got one stuck in the end of the hose here, and then I got this one on the pump. Honda power steering pumps come with this little cover on it, so when I do a pump, I just save an old one. You don't have to necessarily do this, but if you don't, it'll just make a mess, so that's the only reason I really do that. And now I'm gonna pull this reservoir up out of my way. Just kind of grab it, wiggle it, pops right off. And then what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna snake this around down underneath this AC line right here to get it out of my way as best as I can. It's kind of hard to do with one hand, but if you're careful, you can snake it underneath this AC line here. There's another hose connected to the reservoir. You just leave that smaller hose connected. This will give you enough room to get this out of the way. It's kind of hard trying to do this with one hand, which I usually don't do. Okay, and then what I do is I just kind of prop it up out of the way right there. Just be careful, if you tilt it too far, it'll start leaking everywhere. You can kind of jam it in there. Just don't break your dipstick off. If you have to, take it out. And the next thing I'm going to do is take the serpentine belt off. And since I'm going to be replacing it because I'm replacing the timing belt, we do this as a package here at the dealership. So just to make it easy, I'm just going to cut it off. So I'll show you that here in a second. Okay, so this part's kind of important. If you plan on reusing your belt, don't do this. Like I said, I'm replacing it, and just to save myself time, I don't need to reuse it, so I'm just going to cut it. I'm going to grab it with some of these little Nip-X snippers and just snip it off. Just carefully give it a snip. It's hard to do this with one hand. Snip, see, there it goes. Cut it right in half. That way you don't have to worry about messing with the tensioner. I'll show you how to put it back on when I get the new belt ready to go on. But we'll take our old belt and just toss it in the trash. Toss. Okay, so now that we have the belt off, what we're going to need to do next is we're going to have to get our PCM, our powertrain control module, out of the way. It's underneath this black cover right here. So super easy. For this step, you don't need any tools. There's a tab right here. Just kind of lift it up a little bit with your thumb, don't break it off. Slide it out a little. Then there's another one down here, which is kind of hard to see, but it's right there on the side. Do the same thing. Just lift up. Sorry, you can't really see what I'm doing here. And then once you release that, the cover should come off. It might be stuck because there's a little tab right here that slides into that slot down there, so depending on if it's stuck or not, you might have to pull on it, but just toss that up there. Okay, then your PCM is going to have these 3 connectors. You just push down here and then slide back and then pull it off. Same thing with these other 2. Pull that off. Pull that off. And then there's another connector down here, which is kind of hard to see. This one here, there's a little tab right there that you have to lift up and slide that off. You're not going to be able to see me do this because my hand's going to be in the way, so I'm going to lift it up, and it might not be very easy to get to, but once you lift it up, it'll start to slide off. Slide that off, and then you have this connector here. It has a slide lock tab thing on this gray part. So what you do is, I use my finger, but if you can't do it with your finger, grab like a small screwdriver. This little tab right here you lift up on, and then this whole thing will swing open. And once you get it open all the way, then you can pull the connector apart, and voila, it comes right off. Okay, so next, I don't know if you can see, but down there's a green clip that's holding the wire harness onto the actual PCM bracket. So what we're going to do now is get that off of there. it's kind of hard to see. I might have to grab my flashlight here real quick just so I can get a better view. Whoops, strobe light. Let me use the other side. Let's get a little bit better light here. Get it maximum brightness. Okay, so it's kind of hard to see, but down here, there's this little plastic clip. I'm just gonna grab my needle nose pliers and squeeze this carefully. Try to push it out of here. And this part isn't exactly easy either. You can kind of push up and down on it if you need to reposition it. And you squeeze the two tabs together very carefully and push that out. See, now that's disconnected out of that hole. Alright, next I'm going to take the PCM completely out. So there's a bolt way down here, a 10mm bolt. There's one here that's got to come out right on the side next to the headlight here. And then there's this bolt right here that holds the AC line bracket on. You have to take that one out. And then there's one way back there, which is kind of hard to see. I can't really see it right now, so once I get the other bolts out, I'll show you that one. But I'm gonna grab my 10mm and an extension and my little electric impact gun. Of course, you don't need electric tools. It makes it easier when you're like me and you got to get them done fast. So all you need is a cheap ratchet and a 10mm socket, a couple of long extensions, and maybe a swivel. So I'm gonna grab my tools and I'll show you how to remove the PCM completely from the vehicle. Okay, I've got my 3/8 drive Milwaukee electric impact. You don't have to have one of these, but it just makes everything faster. Got my 10mm socket. You don't need a fancy snap-on one to get this job done. This is a frickin' Pittsburgh from Harbor Freight. Works just as good, has a warranty on it, and it's like a quarter of the price. So do what you want. There's no way I'm gonna spend 30 bucks on one socket. So we'll get these bolts taken out real quick. This top one here, zip that out. This is gonna be really hard to do with just one hand, so bear with me here. Set that up there. And then I'm gonna get this one here that's on this AC line. Sorry, I gotta kind of grab my phone with one hand and try to grab this bolt. Okay, got that one out. Set that one up there. They're both pretty much the same. You can interchange them if you want. But this one here goes to the AC bracket. And then there's this one down here. Kind of rusty, be careful. We're gonna break it off. It's kind of hard to see what I'm doing. But, okay, that one's out. Right here. Kind of rusty, but it came out. Set that up there. Okay, now there's one more bolt holding this PCM in, and it's kind of a biatch to get to. So what I'm gonna do first is there's this wire here coming out of the alternator, and it goes up to the fuse box right here, but it's held in by this little clip right here. I'm just gonna slide this clip over and kind of wiggle it around, pop that off just to give myself a little more room. And then on this big main cable here that goes to your PCM, there's another one of those clips right there, and that's connected to the actual bracket of the PCM itself. So I'm gonna get that one off. It's gonna be hard to see. I can't get a really good angle and try to hold my phone at the same time, so bear with me here. Just gonna kind of set my phone down for a second so I can pop that thing off. Let's see if I can get it off of here real quick. I need both hands for this. Okay. So there's that. I got that popped off of that bracket down there. So then, let me see if I can show you where this bolt is. It's back there. See that rusty bolt? I'm gonna need a pretty long extension to get down in there with my 10mm. And of course the bracket has a slot in it. Essentially you should be able to loosen that bolt up just a bit and not take it all the way out and then slide the PCM out. Well, I find it way easier just to take the bolt right out because it doesn't have enough room to slide out easily. So I just take it out, and be careful, you can drop it super easy because it's hard to get your hand back there to try to grab it by hand. But I'll do my best to take it out and not lose it. But if I do drop it, I'll find it, or I'll use a different bolt when I put it back together. I keep spares around. So let me grab my long extension here real quick, and then I'll pull that bolt out and show you how to get this PCM completely out. Okay, so I've got this fairly long extension. It's probably at least a foot long. Picked this up at a pawn shop or whatever a long time ago. Like I said, you don't need super expensive tools to get the job done. So I'm gonna go straight down here through these two AC lines, right down to that bolt down there. Kind of hard to do with one hand, but okay, so I got it on my bolt. See, I got just enough sticking up there. I can get my little impact tool on here. So I'm gonna use my Milwaukee impact and take that thing out. Now I'm gonna have to set my phone down so I can try to grab this bolt with my hand before I drop it on the floor. Okay, there, I got it. Okay, so I got the last bolt out of the PCM. You're gonna have 4 bolts total on a 2010. And there's slight differences between years, so they're not gonna be exactly the same, but essentially, so now I've got the PCM loose, ready to come out. The last step is to dislodge this AC line out of this clip right here. So all I do is I put my fingers underneath the line, I use my thumb and just very carefully push down on the clip and push up with my fingers at the same time, just enough to pop that line out. You don't want to break that clip off because it'll break easy. And then you can just very carefully, I can't stress this enough, very carefully move this line over just ever so slightly so you've got enough room to get this out. Don't bend the crap out of this line because it'll break and it will leak everywhere and customer will not be happy. So then once you got this out, you can just kind of move that over just enough to get it out of the clip. You don't want to kink or bend these lines. They're aluminum. They bend once or twice, they'll break for sure, and then you'll have a massive refrigerant leak in your face and it'll cost you some money. So now that I've got everything loose, I'm going to pull the PCM all the way out. Just kind of work it out of here, tilt it, whatever you got to do. It's kind of hard to show you exactly what I'm doing. Just carefully don't catch it on anything. PCM's out, pull the whole thing right out, and then just set it off to the side, boom. Okay, next, this wire harness here is held on to this bracket by this bolt here. So I'm going to take out this 10mm bolt and I'm going to move this wire harness completely out of my way. That way I can access the motor mount, because this whole motor mount has to be removed. And then there's a second piece of that mount here with these two 14mm bolts. I'm going to be taking all of that off to access the timing belt. So I'm going to grab my 10mm, my long extension. It doesn't have to be this long, but it works. So my little impact down in here and get this bolt out. Let's see if I can prop this up right here. Okay, I got the bolt out. I'm just going to grab it, set it off to the side, just a little 10mm bolt. Just remember that this one goes in that hole. If you want to, you can take this bracket, move it up out of your way, stick the bolt back in the hole, just finger tight. That way you know that that bolt goes there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get these wires out of my way. I'm just going to kind of pull them up the best I can out of the way and just essentially jam it in between this AC line right here just to hold it. See, that bracket keeps it from falling back down. That way you have more room. And then see, this is that wire for the alternator that I removed earlier off of that bracket. So now we can see the motor mount clearly. So now we need to, first of all, this bolt here that's sideways, this holds the engine half of this bracket onto the motor mount. You need to remove this bolt. It's a 17 millimeter, and fair warning, a lot of times since this steel bolt is in an aluminum bracket, it will strip out the hole back here where these threads are. And I've had it happen countless times where you go to take this bolt out and it's super tight, and you end up having to use a giant breaker bar to get this bolt out, and then it destroys this bracket. So if you're not comfortable doing this and having this happen, you're either going to have to find a used one at a junkyard or buy a brand new bracket, because there's no real fix to that. You might be able to tap it out or do some kind of ghetto fix, but we don't do that. I work at a dealership. I either have an extra one laying around and I just give it to them for free, or I will tell, if I don't have one, I'll just let the customer know this thing's stripped out. But we'll see what happens. I'm gonna get my 17 and I'm gonna take that bolt out, or at least attempt to, see if it'll come out without a fight here. So I'll go grab my sockets for that real quick. Okay, for this, all I've got is a 3/8 drive ratchet. It is a snap-on. I was feeling rich that day, but I do have just a 17 millimeter deep. You want to make sure you use a 6-point socket, not a 12-point. The 12-point sockets are not as good of a fit, and they can strip out bolts, and I don't like using them unless I absolutely have to. So 6-point socket, Harbor Freight 17, whatever you got. You don't have to be fancy, it's just got to work. So now I'm going to attempt to show you here what I do with this is get your 17 on there and see if I can crack this thing loose with one hand. Might take two hands here, so hang on a second. Okay, it's starting to move a little bit. I think this one might actually come out without stripping out, because this is aluminum, so once you break this thing loose, it's going to get very easy to turn very fast. If it doesn't, then chances are you're pulling the threads out of the bracket, which you pretty much have no choice at this point. But I think it's coming out pretty smooth here. Most mechanics won't do this by hand, they'll use an air ratchet, but just to show you how to do this, I'm just going to use this. I don't have enough hands right now, so just get her going, and then after a while you should be able to just twist it out with your fingers. And then another important thing too to pay attention to is this little bracket. It's a vibration dampener, so you got to make sure when you put this thing back together that you pay attention to the orientation of this thing. It points towards the engine, the rubber part, and then there's a little metal tab that you can see right there. It'll hook underneath here when you tighten it back up, so make sure you don't put it back on like this or leave it dangling like that. It's got to be the right orientation. So I'm just going to finish taking out this bolt here. It's loose enough I can get it by hand, so I'm going to try to get my socket back off of here. It's kind of stuck. Set my ratchet over there. I'm just going to finish taking this out by hand. Pull that bolt out. Bolt looks good. Threads look good. Okay, so that's out. I'm just going to set this up there. And then next what I'm going to do is grab a bigger electric impact wrench. I'm going to take out these two 14 millimeter bolts here and remove this whole bracket. That way I have easier access to these 3 bolts here on this motor mount, and then I'll be taking this whole mount off of here. So I'm going to go get my impact real quick and my 14. I've got another Milwaukee impact, a 1/2-inch drive. I'm going to grab a 14 millimeter socket, an extension, and my 1/2-inch drive impact, so I'll be right back. Okay, here's what I use for those two 14s. I just got my fairly long 1/2-inch drive extension, 1/2-inch drive, 14 millimeter deep socket, 6-point. Don't use 12 points. Milwaukee gun, Just get this thing down in here, zip off these 2 bolts. It's really hard to see with one hand here. It's kind of behind that bracket, so you can't really see it, but just kind of zip that out. Zip that one out, careful you don't drop anything. And then I'm gonna take off this here bracket, get that out of the way, leave those 2 bolts right in there. And what I always do is, I'm gonna have to set the phone down again, is I'm gonna put that long bolt back through here, that way it doesn't get dropped on the floor or lost. So I'm gonna put that back in there real quick. I just do that off camera here so I can use both hands. Get my socket off of this bolt if I can. Actually, you can just stay on there. I'm just gonna set this over here. All right, next, now that I've got that bracket off, I've got to take off these 3 17mm bolts here. There's one kind of back there to remove this whole motor mount. I mean, you could do this without taking off this motor mount, but it gives you so much more room to work with, and it's way easier, so I just do it every time. I don't even bother trying to do it without taking that off. So I'm gonna grab me a 17mm socket here real quick and a swivel extension. So open this up, 17, 6-point socket. Grab my 1/2-inch swivel. This is a Craftsman swivel, 1/2-inch Craftsman. Older than dirt, bought it at a pawn shop or garage sale or something, but hey, it works. That's all I care about. So I'm gonna get this hooked up here real quick. I really need like a tripod or something for my camera. I don't usually make videos, so I'm gonna use the same impact, same extension, just with the swivel and the 17 instead of the 14. So I'm gonna try to prop this up right here so you can see. First I'm gonna do this front bolt right here. The middle one is very short, the other 2 are longer and they're the same length. So take this out, set it off to the side, don't lose it. And then I'm gonna get this back one back here. Loosen that up, pull this out of the way. Alright, now I'm ready to get my motor mount out. Just pull it straight out. Here's the mount. You got two long bolts stay in those holes. The short bolt goes in that hole. So I'm going to take and set this down again. Set my little bolt back in the hole. Set this off to the side on the table over here. Don't drop anything. Okay, so now we're getting the big picture here. So next what I'm gonna do is remove the power steering pump out of the way so I can get to one of the bolts and give myself more room. So on this particular Odyssey, there is 2 bolts holding the power steering pump on. They're 12mm bolts. There's one back here, and there's one underneath the pump right by this bracket here where we were just working. I don't know if you can see that other 12mm bolt there. We're going to remove that, and then we're not going to take this line off of here. We're going to leave that right on there and just move the pump out of the way. But back here on the rear valve cover, there is a bracket attached to this power steering line. There's a 10mm bolt holding it to the valve cover. We're going to take that off too to give ourselves some more room. That way we can get the pump out of the way. So I'm gonna go grab my stuff that I need to take this off, and then I will show you how to move the pump out of the way to give yourself enough room to access what you need to access. So I'll be right back. Okay, for this part, I've got my little Milwaukee 1/4-inch drive ratchet, electric ratchet, and my 10mm semi-deep socket here. I'm gonna use this to take out this bolt back here on this bracket. I don't know if I can show you it or not because there's not a lot of light in there, but there's that uppermost 10mm bolt right there on that little bracket attached to that black line there. That's got to come out, so I'm going to take that out real quick. I'm going to set the camera down here, see if I can. Just going to snake this back here like this. I need to use my other hand to feel for the bolt, so I got to set the phone